This tape, entitled "The Forties," is having the audio added to it by me, Adelaide Best, of 1993. And Steve keeps saying, "Say how old you are." Yes, I am 81 now. So the 40s was 50 years ago, and if I don't remember everything, I think that's quite understandable. This was the year that Cy had a garden. It was built down beyond the tennis court toward Scow Island, and it was fertilized with a lot of wonderful cow manure from shore, and she had the most luxuriant garden. It was really terrific. The color doesn't seem to show up much here, but it was actually very beautiful. Cy was not married at this time. The year 1940 was the year that she got engaged. So we have her here snipping and pruning and enjoying the fruits of her early in the season labors. The garden was never again quite so beautiful, and as the years went on and Cy moved over to Panema, she spent her gardening efforts there rather than here, and no one would ever guess today that there had ever been a garden down here behind the tennis court.
If you go there, there's a square of stones, which some people have mistaken for a foundation. I understand they're actually the border of this garden.
You're absolutely right, Steve. That's exactly what all the stone wall was. It's always fun to see ourselves back in what we might have termed our prime, back when we were younger and slender and physically active. It's really nice. Cy's hairdo changed from year to year. She wore it long until she got through college. Now we're up in northern Canada at a fishing club called the Pontiac. It was started by a local group of businessmen, mostly associated with the Newell Company. And Mother's friend, Warren Goddard from St. Louis, was made a member or permitted to be a visiting member. And one year, we called him Uncle Warren, and we called Mother's friend Aunt Louie. Aunt Louie is there in the peach-colored pants. And they invited Cy and me to go with them. Mac had died in April of that spring, and they thought it would be a good diversion for me. Although I never had been much of a fisherman, however, this was my only real experience with fishing, and I must say it spoiled me for anything else, because one was paddled around with a guide in beautiful scenery. The hook was baited, and when you got a bite, which you did about every minute and a half, it was pulled in and the guide took the fish off and put it somewhere. And that's my idea of fishing. We went up for about 3 days. The camp was quite rustic, more Adirondack style, and the fish that we caught in the morning were cleaned and filleted by the guides and fried for lunch. There is Aunt Louie. She had such a jolly smile, and she was Mother's dearest friend. And we went where they went in the summer for many years. Even on Cape Cod, Aunt Louie rented a house there, and Mother rented a house next door. Really, the Pontiac was gorgeous country. And apparently I was quite taken with the method of preparing the fish. They did it very, very quickly and very carefully. It was rather a rough summer for me, because besides being just widowed, Uncle Sam was courting Aunt Cy, and it seemed very hard to, though I was happy happiness, it was hard on me. This was one of the few brief portages, and the guides are carrying the canoes through this fairly swampy area.
It looks like a canvas canoe, isn't it?
It's quite possible it was. Remember, this is 1940s, 50 years ago. So, but the fishing was superb. I'm not even sure what we were catching. I suppose, is it bass? I don't know. Just as I don't know one car from another, I really don't know one fish from another. You can see a day's catch, what we didn't eat for lunch. It reminds me of what Steve and Linda and the children and I have done just this weekend. In May of 1993, we canoed down the Brandywine River, all of 4 feet deep, but not quite. I mean, a different kind of scenery from this, but equally lovely. And there is Cy and Sam Conant, who came up to visit and to press his suit. He seems a bit self-conscious, perhaps. He worked for Greenfield Tap and Dye, was a traveling salesman, and had been introduced to Mac and me 2 years before by a college friend of Cy's, Mary Porter, with whom Sam had grown up in Greenfield. Here we have Sam shaking the hand of Tony Mankle, now a mature Williams man, and his fiancée, Claire Newell. Beautiful girl. They, of course, are now known as the Mankles and are the senior citizens of a large clan of Mankle children and grandchildren who have populated the entire Chippewa Bay. And Claire and Tony purchased Temagami from my sons and use it now sometimes for one of their families, sometimes as a rental proposition. Sam, alas and alack, has his store clothes on and is having to leave, but they are engaged. Yes. The boat is the Temagami 6, I think, was a Gar Wood. Pretty handsome, too. Another regatta, canoe race. In those days, it seemed people took part in the regatta beyond the age of 10. We get all ages paddling away like mad, on up into 13, 14, 15. I don't know now whether I can introduce you to all these people sitting around on the dock as fast as they flicker by here. Canoe something. Goodness knows what it is. There was a good shot of the Getha in the background at anchor in the bay. Looks as though the water's pretty low this year. I guess they're getting ready for a canoe race without paddles. Yes, oh, ladies always wore bathing caps. Well, yes, where did they come from? I don't know, they must. I think they're not supposed to be using them, but they certainly are, aren't they? There, the second in line there is Janet Wood, who was always, and Lauren Wood, and I'm not sure who. Janet was, oh, there is Mother and Mrs. Quarrier. Mrs. Quarrier always wore a high neck dress or scarf or something, and a hat. She was the wife of Old Man Quarrier, the mother of the 3 Quarrier boys, including Fitzhugh. And that is Mrs. Cuthbert, wife of Benny, mother of, oh, the names are all escaping me now, of Ellen Burt and Betty Jean Wood. They had a boy in the middle, too, who was sometimes up. Janet died in her teens. From some. Now, as you can see, people sat along the wall and cheered everybody. The slightly older ladies got chairs in the second row. There's Mother and Janet Wood, and then Mrs. Wood, and there is Uncle Warren, who took us up to the Pontiac. A jolly man and a very good friend to Mother. There is Old Man Quarrier coming along. Mrs. Quarrier, Ruth Hallowell. She was married several times. I forget what her name was right then. My cousin Mary Houston Lucas. A balloon scramble. I'm not sure whether you had to see how many you could break or what the procedure was. Looks like pretty hard on the feet there. And these are Archie and Cindy Quarrier. As you can see, Cindy came in between them. But she never enjoyed the Quarrier boys' sense of humor. They were given, all the Quarriers were given to violent practical jokes, like pushing people off the roof into the water and that sort of thing. And we never thought things were as funny as they did. That is Barbara Lucas with her father, Luke. She was a timid little sprite that summer, given to, there's Aunt Louie and Mother, and Ellen Burt. Ellen Cuthbert at that point. There are pictures of me at the island at that same age as Cindy, on a tennis court, doing the same thing. As I got very confused when I was editing all these tapes as to what generation I was looking at. Because everybody did just the same things, at the same size, that is. I can't recall what is coming next. Ah, yes. This is over at the Chippewa dock. You can see the different type of boats that we had then. That still is the way I think a boat should look. None of these plastic cream-colored jobs. Everybody had mahogany boats, Garwoods, Chris Crafts, or something. And here is the Best family. Well done up in lifeies. Tomogamy. I'm not sure. Was it the 7th? I couldn't tell. And this is the parking lot over at the dock. Hasn't changed too much. I believe it's bigger now. Don't know what all we have picked up. Trunks or something. Ah, yes, these are the Jones family. We have picked up the Jones family. Come for their annual visit. Tom. There's Anne. And here is another one that maybe looks like the same cruiser that we had in some other stretch. They're obviously friends of the Conants, taking up the entire Conant dock. Oh, and I remember this was a day of the most tremendous blow, and I thought, oh, if the water is gorgeous, we have white caps, it's magnificent. So I rushed around with my camera. You can see over at the left the windows on the Panema Boathouse. There was a year when we shared Temagami, the Conants, and the Bess, and we had 3 children in diapers and having bottles. We brought 3 colored maids from Peoria, and after that summer, Sam said he would never share a summer vacation again, and they took immediate steps to make the Panema Boathouse habitable, and built the windows around on what was then the upper porch, so that was then their living room. That is the top of Panema, where Si and Sam courted, and why they always loved the island of Panema. And that site that we have just looked at was where they planned to build their permanent house. The Panema Boathouse had a living room behind those windows, and 3 bedrooms, and quite a large kitchen dining area. Kind of a tired-looking boathouse we had. And it was shortly after that, this is what I later named Hale Kai. Seeing I was terribly Hawaiian then, it was called House by the Water, which everyone thought was pretty ridiculous, but they called it that anyway. It finally stuck. That is Leisha Quarrier and Bo Collins, who apparently were going together that summer. Leisha then married Sidney Quarrier and had the little Quarrier boys. As I say, I am not in chronological order here. Oh, that is which wood? One of the woods. Well, I guess it wasn't Bo Collins she was going with. She must have been going with one of the woods. Going with at the island didn't amount to very much. It was mostly playing tennis or water skiing or some vigorous sport. You can see the whitecaps. It's really gorgeous. The bungalow doesn't change. Even during when the big house burned and the fire was so close, only the roof was kind of scorched. It was a miracle that it survived. The big house had a wonderful long porch with all those old-fashioned rocking chairs on it. And we used to sit out there with our feet on the railing and sing. Of course, people don't seem to sing much anymore. But we did a lot of singing. This is the wash house, now known as the cabin, which Mother fixed over for herself after Cindy was born, and I wished to inhabit all of the bungalow. We used to always sit out in those deck chairs right after breakfast because it was the warmest place on the island. I see we have built the shuffleboard court and that little bridge across over to Panema. Oh, you can see there they have not enclosed the upper porch. I'm obviously very out of sync. That is Ruth Talcott Hallowell and their little dog. We all have so loved the view of the beautiful water and of Bolt's Castle off in the distance.
It's Dark Island, actually.
Dark Island.
That's not Bolt Castle.
No,
That's
I
Dark
see.
Island. Yeah.
Thank you for that correction. In those days, the river traffic was quite heavy. You could almost always see a freighter in one direction or another. Now, in the 90s, it has fallen off to very little. There is Judy and Jamie. I expect this was the summer that we had everybody in diapers, the summer of which I spoke, before they did over the Panema Boathouse. That is Ann Talcott, who spent that summer with us. Pretty view, isn't it? And that is Mattie Newberry, who we never could have gotten her to really pose, but I caught her unaware. She was our cook for many years, after the colored girls ceased to want to come. In the old days, back in the 30s, almost everyone had colored help, and all the hotels at Alexandria Bay had colored help, so that on Sundays, when they had a day off, there was some place to go and some other people to see. After the war, nobody had help. You got whatever help you could find over on shore. This was a picnic back in the days when, if as far as you went was over to Ozone, it was pretty darn exciting for all these little dinks in lifeys. And that is Bill Burt's wife. That's Bill Bryant, now the owner of 2 islands and innumerable large boats, a very successful stockbroker. Jamie and Pat Conant. And I think Billy Burt, oh, that's Steve, yes. No, it's Bill Burt's wife. I forget what her name is. And that is the Joneses' general factotum known as Moyne. Oh, Lammy Cuthbert. That's the name, yes. Not Bert, Lammy Cuthbert. Jean, Jones, and Jeannie. We practically had a nursery school. You can see how the children had an awful lot of fun. There was always someone to play with. And we didn't really worry about them as long as there was the absolute rule that nobody left the house without a lifey on. And so, from that point of view, we really didn't worry very much. And it's amazing how children can walk around on rocky edges. They don't fall, as a general rule. There is Don Best, and I suppose that's Dick hiding his face somewhere. And me, Gene Jones. We spent a lot of time sitting in those beach chairs. There is a view of the corner of the bungalow porch. You can see how high the water was and how rough it was that day, with the water coming practically onto the porch. That point at which we are looking is the one where my father courted my mother back in 1902. After the big house burned, we built a kitchen out of this side porch and closed that, and it made a long, narrow, but very workable kitchen. We loved to watch the waves break over these rocks in front of the bungalow. And the kids adored putting on slickers and standing out there and getting splashed, as you can see. Big deal. A little bit more fun than playing in the hose, perhaps. Look at those white caps. It looks practically like the ocean. We don't have many days like that at the island. And when we do, needless to say, we try not to go out in a boat. Because while we grow up getting used to taking boats out in most kinds of weather, there's no sense testing fate with such big waves. That little part sticking out of the boathouse that you could see used to be known as the tool room. It was questionable whether it was really a workable tool room or a junk room. You can see it really was blowing. Yeah. That is Eagle's Wing out in the distance. For many years it had a little duck hunting shack on it, owned by a butcher from Alexandria Bay. That's looking over toward shore. Actually, we are 2 miles out from the mainland shore. And the islands run kind of in lines, and there's one row of islands about a mile out from shore, and then our ones practically out in the middle of the river, which they're not quite as close together. And that is the back side of the Panema boathouse. As you can see, Aunt Si has, as I said, had moved her gardening efforts to Panema Island. Pretty bathing suit, too. Sam supervising as usual. Although he did, as the years went on, he did a marvelous job of planting all the petunias up on the rock. That is Mary Habercorn, our sitter that year, who came with us from Peoria. She was perhaps our best sitter. She loved it, and she was the most fun. It was absolutely necessary to have a sitter. I think Si and I would have both lost our minds if we had not had someone like that to ride herd on the kids. Well, yes, these are Sam's friends from Greenfield. There's Sam. And I think in the bow is his lifelong friend, Groverman Cleveland. Groverman Payne. There I am being rowed by, I think that's Jay Talcott from across the bay. Everyone at the island started to row very early on, mostly pretty successfully. Oh, yes. Oh, don't pinch your fingers. They also learned to row simply tied to shore and being put in the boat, and you rowed backward and forward and put the oars up and down. Again, these are Sam's friends. Two of Sam's friends, two of Jay's friends, I think. She was a cute size, anyway. See how clear the water was in those days, before we had all the algae from putting the washing machine overflow into the river. I'm sure it's the washing machine that did it with all the detergent and so forth. And these two, we had Whirl Away, and what was his name, Steve? The other one, it was the whoever had won the Kentucky Derby that year and the runner-up. And the kids had endless fun with these horses. They lasted for several years, too. I don't know, I think we got them at Abercrombie's or some plush place. That is Little Jones, H.R. Jones. No, that's Cindy. Covered up. And that was our nursemaid, Ollie. When we came to save driving time, we drove up to Detroit and went on the boat, which the DC boats at that time ran from overnight from Detroit to Buffalo. And boy, did we have service, because we had Ollie, who was pretty as a picture and so attractive, and Georgiana, and every waiter on deck wanted to make their acquaintance, so we had awfully good service. There is my mother, grandma and granddaughter, over on the point of Ozone. It's hard to think that Mother died at the age of 60. She was 62 there. And 1942. Now having gotten Si and Sam engaged, this is Judy in the backyard in Toledo. And she was a cute baby. I think at that time Si and Sam were living in Cleveland. Or wait a minute. No, that must have been when they had moved to Silver Springs, when Sam was sent to Washington by his company to work. And apparently they had come back to Toledo to make a visit. Si always used to say that was the worst year of her entire life, was the one when she spent in Silver Springs with Judy just a baby, nobody you could even talk to, gas rationing, Sam working 12 to 14 hours a day in the district, and she stuck at home with no wheels and no friends. It really must have been quite rough. Well, obviously Cindy is 3 years older than Judy, so I suppose Cindy is now about 4 or something. And again, this is another marvelous picnic, about 35 feet from the bungalow, but out in the woods. And Barbara Lucas. This was down between the bungalow and the cabin. I was going to say earlier that that little cabin, long, long ago, used to be known as the wash house. But then when Mother decided she needed a little peace and quiet and wanted to get out of the bungalow, she built a bath on the side of that, and equipped it for her own bedroom and study with some charming maple furniture and a little walk that led down there and a little screened porch on the front end. And it has ever since been known as the cabin. And in later years we put 2 beds in it after Mother died, and it made a marvelous little guest cottage. She was a very shy little girl, so delicate compared to bouncing Cynthia. I think that is Uncle Luke helping Cynthia. No, it's Uncle Sam. And I think we call that the Little Bear. It was a copy of the original Little Bear. Oh, that's Judy swimming. I find it interesting now that these babies are all grown up and all, to find how, well, of course they've changed, but the basic expression is still perfectly recognizable. I think a very good stroke for that size. She seems to know what she's doing. That's a very good boat in which to learn to row. This, I guess it's the beach. We used to bring sand in every other year. Up on Grenadier there was a sand pit, and there used to be a retired man with a barge that he would bring down a barge full, and it would be shoveled off and onto the rocks. Then he got too old and went out of the business, and the beach gradually disintegrated and all the rocks came through. But it was a wonderful, even though it's a small beach, it was fun to have. Here are H.R. and Cindy having caught rock bass in the boathouse slips. Mostly the hooks were baited with a leaf or almost anything. Rock bass will bite at anything. And since the rock bass weren't good for anything, eventually they were thrown back. But it makes for very good early fishing. There's my Aunt Florence. Why, that must have been Mother's last summer. Aunt Florence came up to keep her company. Certainly looked as though I had curly hair. I must have had a good permanent. Yes, Cindy and H.R. Jones again. I am reminded of watching Owen and Ellen Best with their popsicles just this noon at lunch. Same gestures. I guess, oh, this is my second wedding to Don Best in October, the day before, 2 days before Cindy's birthday. Don at that time was a lieutenant in the Navy. And that left is my friend Helen Bamford. Matt Greaves Walker had worked with her husband there at her left. I'm kind of sorry now that I gave my wedding dress away with the rest of my costume collection to the University of Hawaii. And there was Cindy, who was my only attendant, my flower girl. She was enchanted with that peach velvet dress with a lace collar. She still remembers it. We were married at home because Mother was very ill. We had hoped that she might be able to come downstairs, but she was not, and she died 3 weeks later of cancer, a week after we returned from our honeymoon, which we spent at the homestead. There is my Aunt Ruth, Uncle Carl's wife, my friend Helen Bamford, and my Uncle Charlie Cartwright from across the street. This is the house that we rented in Highland Park, and the owner was also in the Navy, had been sent to Washington, and we rented with the understanding, or something written into the contract, that we would give it up if ever they were ordered back to Highland Park, Illinois. Don had been, it was stationed at Great Lakes Naval Training Station in the group which supervised the various naval training units in different colleges. It was only across the main road from the school, and Cynthia started first grade there. She started under the name of Greaves-Walker because Dad Greaves Walker was still alive, and we would not, while Don Best wanted to adopt her, we didn't think of changing her name as long as Dad was alive because he was very proud of it. Now it is spring, and I think we're having a visit from Uncle George down in Baton Rouge. George was head of the Exxon's research research department. And that is Jim Best, little Jim Best. This, we rode at the Lake Forest Riding Club. I forget the name of the club. And this was an event, a mother and child event, and I made these drum majorette costumes. And I was pretty proud of them. I thought we looked pretty snazzy. This was the people who collected old carriages and carriage horses.
So that was an antique even then.
Oh yes, heavens yes. A neighbor child from somewhere. And this is Jim and Cindy with their marionettes or some kind of toys. Grosse Pointe. I think Cy and Sam were living in Grosse Pointe at this time. Oh. Why were they in Grosse Pointe? I don't know, but that is Judy, obviously. because when Si and Sam were first married, their first home was in Cleveland Heights. And I know that we went to Silver Springs. I helped Si go there with Judy in a basket, which must have been a year or two later. Now, I don't recall what they were doing in Grosse Pointe, but of course I obviously went up to visit and take pictures. And at that age and size, a backyard wading pool seemed to offer plenty of opportunity for getting wet. Just for the record, these two little things have now reached the advanced age. Judy will finish up her studies so that she will be a principal of a school in Springfield, Ohio. She is now, I guess, 51 or so. Her two children are both out of school. Well, Scott is out of school and married for the second time. Oh, here we are. We have put up a railing around the deck to keep small fry from falling in, I guess. They never fell in when there wasn't any, but there we have it. And that is Don Best rowing Jamie. Out in the bay. Oh, this is early on. Panema doesn't have the windows in it yet. Oh, Judy. When was Judy born? 40. She must have been born in 42. Oh, yes, Judy was still around that long summer with everybody when we had babies and bottles lying around on the floor all the time. Don. That's an odd craft. Wonder where they got that. There's Sam, of course. That must have been when they went fishing and got all those fish that I wondered when they ever caught them. No, I don't know. Now, whose little dog is that? Oh, my. Jamie was born in 44. So this must be about 45 or 6. Regatta. Uncle Jim at the left. Oh yes, Ann Talcott in the middle. That's Archie Courier. Looks like a peanut scramble. I don't know how they were supposed to collect those. Or maybe they're just swimming through. No, they're collecting them. Yes. It looks just the same year after year after year, and there's always just as many little ones. But you can see that the sand there is really nice, and I understand that the Menkels have now renewed the beach, which is a good thing. That's Villers Seymour, who used to own Chokecherry at one time, and Don Best. Sid Courier, who used to call the shots at the regatta. He is the one who became the famous burn doctor. That's Ruth Hathaway. City Courier. Leisha. Oh, that's that dreadful Dave Halliwell in the background with glasses that became so disagreeable by the, the end of his marriage to Ruth Talcott. I presume, no, that's Jamie still, isn't it?
Cy Conant made some wonderful toy boats in those days out of a pair of 2x4s that she would rasp the ends off of, put together, and paint up beautifully to look like the freighters going by at the time. They were much loved for many years.
There's Steve Best and Pat Conant in the jump thing. Steve Best and Ad. Doesn't look as though you saw much point in smiling, Steve. Cindy and HR really don't care much for each other now they've grown up. That, again, is another view of the big house, which burned in, when did it burn? In 63. Uncle Jim being rowed by niece and nephew, or cousin second, once removed.
I remember Uncle Jim Hardy as a wonderful favorite. Not only, as you saw in that picture, was he full of laughs and happy to play with the kids, but he brought neat stuff. He arrived one year in a Nash car that had fold-down seats that you could actually sleep in the car. Wow.
I finally thought who that is. That is Sam's youngest brother, Johnny Conant. Uncle Jim really was very tall. I think he's 6'6". Dick, I think, with Mother. Again, very high water, catwalks. This is Dorothy Best, another one, and Uncle Gene. They were from Princeton, New Jersey, another of Don's brothers and sisters-in-law with children. Dorothy and Freddie, I think.
The boat's called Worry.
What?
The boat's called Worry.
Oh, you know we had the Worry. Heaven's sakes, it came with Panema. When Mother bought Panema, we got the Worry, which was a covered boat, very top-heavy. But it was marvelous for a work boat, a boat for carrying people to and from Chippewa. But until the year when Don and Sam took it to shore when they had to leave, and they darn near rolled over, and Si and I watched them go and said, never again. And we got rid of the worry. That is Julie Chapman, I think. Pat Conant. Pat Conant, now at the age of 40 something or other, has recently been elected Commodore of the Lake Tahoe Yacht Club, which I think is a paper yacht club. But he is a slender, charming guy. Whose children both recently got married last summer. Must be Dick at 1 year. Got it. That is Dave Cummings with his youngest, visiting from Peoria, Illinois. His middle daughter. Oh, we felt so sorry that they made the children have a rowing race in that awful sea. No one ever knew whether Judy really won or not. But it never should have been held in that sea with that aged child. Pretty rough going. In those days, people used to bring rowboats and canoes to the regatta. Of recent years, they don't seem to go in for that very much. I suppose because the children simply aren't learning to row anymore. Everybody thinks they must have a motor by the time they're 7. I don't know just whose sailboat that is. I think, not sure just who those are. It seems to me we spent all of our sunshiny days down there near the beach with having lunch, feeding small fry. Yes, the chairs got very hot in the sun. That's Dorothy Best with her little one practicing rowing. It was a nice sheltered place, safe for children to try to row.
Not so sheltered for the adults lying there if I see the kids running through.
Yes, kind of dangerous. Ella Cummings. I don't know who the next one was. From the pictures, it looks as though we had a steady stream of visitors. It wasn't really that bad, but there were always enough of just family to make it look as though there was a great deal of activity going on. Yeah. There is the boathouse that Don made for the boys. We could put it up almost anywhere by pushing the roof poles down into the sand through the holes in the dock, which anchored it there. You could tie up a lot of boats there. I know I should be talking here, but I can't think of anything really relevant to say about all this eternal swimming. But of course, it's what we did a lot of at the island. There is the honeybee. My Aunt Florence, who had a place on Cape Cod, wanted to give the girls, her nieces, great nieces, a sailboat. And they used this little model of a catboat down along Cape Cod. They had whole flocks of them. So she sent that up. We never really liked the honeybee very much. It didn't seem to like being in the Thousand Islands, but at least Cindy and Jay and Judy had a chance to practice sailing. And I think that's where Cindy really got her first love, because she has always loved to sail a boat. I never liked catboats much. They tended to what we called gooseneck, when the boom would just go up, right, floop up to the mast sometimes. I never cared for that characteristic. But Cindy did learn to sail. Heavens, what's happening? What?
What about that scow?
Well, we had a scow for a good many years. You remember, Steve, it died and was put down on the lower end of Temagami in the woods. I think Mother got it so that we could have a diving board off of it. And there is Vernie, patiently polishing up the Temagami. He and Mattie were husband and wife. They lived on shore, had a house on shore. Vernie was the mainstay of the island, winter caretaker, summer boatman for years and years. There we are, taking the Jean Bess back to shore for the end of their visit, I think. You can see how necessary it was to have a good-sized boat. People got along with little tin boats, but it was lots nicer to have a fairly substantial boat. The Temagami 6, that was. Garwood.
I noticed, Mom, the next one we got, the 7th, was not one of these sort of cockpit boats, but what they called a utility boat, which had much more open space in it.
Yes, that was what Hutchinson was building by then, and I think by then we felt that it was more important to have something that would carry luggage and lots of people than it was to have all those seats.
I guess since this is like getting the station wagon when you get the kids, huh?
Right. Steve and Dorothy Best, I think. Steve is practicing sailing.
Oh, that's the 3.2.
Ah, so it is. Yes, we inherited that when Mother bought Panema too. And a yawl. And a yawl is different from a ketch in that the rear sail is behind the tiller on a yawl. And this was a cute little boat. I won a lot of sailing races, handicap, of course, in this little thing way back in the 30s. We named it the 3.2 because we got it the year that Prohibition ended with making beer legal if it had no more than 3.2% alcoholic content. Now we had pictures of this just in another tape. I think that's Jay. You see, he's hardly heavy enough to make the stern of the aquaplane go down. Actually, the motor was not strong enough, hardly, to pull Cindy at that point, she being 6 years older and somewhat heavier. But Jay had a ball. Maybe that's the end of that tape.